And we're back on a Friday in the car like we never left. Welcome to the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all for spending some of your kind of shitty Friday afternoon here with me in New York. But once again, we're going to skip past all that promotional jazz and get right to the guts of the episode. So my busted right arm, the bicep, doesn't look so bad from certain angles, but rest assured, it does not look the same. Not that it was so spectacular, but it's a lot shorter. It appears shorter. It's going to be bunched up when it heals 100%. It's 3 weeks to the day since I tore it partially from the bottom. Just ridiculous. If you missed it, I tore it pulling a tire out of the trunk. I didn't even get to do it at the gym. Them's the breaks. That's the way it goes. It's better that I did it this way, where the only injury was to the arm itself, than the way that I thought I might have this kind of an injury, where I'm doing, let's say, 70-pound dumbbells, snap, crackle, boom, dumbbell, pop down, bang, on my head, could break my nose. No, that is not good. I am not happy, but it's better that I did it the way that I did, which was in a controlled kind of a situation where the only injury was to my arm and not 3 other parts of the body. But today is not going to be an injury, woe is me kind of an episode. It's not even going to be a movie episode. Today marks 102 years since the opening of the House That Ruth Built, OG Yankee Stadium in the Bronx. It opened on April 18th, 1923. And for those who, you don't have to be a Yankee fan, but are just kind of general fans of baseball, and you know the name Babe Ruth, you know, okay, he was with the Yankees, and I feel like I heard something about a curse with regards to Babe Ruth, but you might not know that the New York Yankees were around well before there was anything called Yankee Stadium. They were first known as the New York Highlanders. And the New York Highlanders played in a ballpark which is long gone. I'm pretty sure it was in Lower Manhattan, but I don't remember. I should know this. I've seen pictures. Hilltop Park existed until, like the 19-teens. It wasn't really anything special. It looked good for the day. For that era, it looked like a minor league ballpark. The problem was, this was not a minor league team. The Yankees already by the teens had some pretty serious players. Some guys who would end up playing alongside Babe Ruth when he finally got to the Yankees. But most of the Yankees' early era after Hilltop Park, they played at what was known as the Polo Grounds. The Polo Grounds is where the New York baseball giants, now San Francisco Giants, it was where they played their home games. And we see this, for example, the Jets and Giants sharing space, sharing an arena. It technically was the Giants Stadium. The old place used to be called Giant Stadium, and the Mets played at Shea Stadium back in the day, where the New York Metropolitans, the baseball team, played. But you'd like to have your own field. You just want to have your own field so your fans have a place that they can call, this is our home, this is our spot, this is our turf, our field, we're going to defend our however you want to do it. Fans get a little carried away with the proclamations about, we're going to defend our home court. Okay, whatever. It's not you, it's the players, but okay, we want to go that route. But the Yanks shared space with the New York baseball giants, the giants of legendary names such as Christy Mathewson, the pitcher, to this day, many consider to be top 5 greatest pitchers who ever lived. You look at Christy Mathewson's numbers and you just say, well, look at Babe Ruth's numbers, look at Joe DiMaggio's numbers, look at Lou Gehrig's numbers, look at Christy Mathewson's numbers and say, well, how are these not typos? Well, this can't be right. He had how many wins in how many starts? How did his arm not fall off? Well, in the immortal words of Shrek, good question. But the Giants of John McGraw, the manager, Christy Mathewson, and other all-time players, trying to remember the name of the first baseman, was a guy who hit a ton of home runs. They were better than the Yankees. And there are certain historical realities and facts that almost seem too perfect. The sense is, well, this must be embellished. it can't be this cut and dried. This can't be exactly the way that it's portrayed. And sometimes, especially when there is no one around to confirm it, well, that might be the case. But the reality is that Babe Ruth coming to the Yankees was the turning point for Major League Baseball as a whole, and it was a turning point for two franchises. Boston Red Sox, whose owner, Harry Frazee, sold Babe Ruth to the Yankees, more or less in exchange for a mortgage on Fenway Park, but it was a little bit more complicated than that. Harry Frazee was a Broadway, New York, impresario, and he had this musical. He was so excited, and he needed a little bit of extra, influx of financing in order to make sure he could get this musical through. And the name of the musical that Harry Frazee was willing to punt Babe Ruth to the New York Yankees for, No, Nanette. No, Nanette. It ended up not being that big of a hit at the Broadway box office. But Babe Ruth with the New York Yankees was a very big hit. And the other thing with Babe Ruth that casual fans don't know, he was a left-handed pitcher who just happened to be a hell of a hitter. Babe Ruth at one time held the record, most consecutive scoreless innings pitched in the World Series. I think he threw 29 straight scoreless innings. That's more than 3 consecutive shutouts. Babe Ruth at the time was one of the greatest pitchers who ever lived. And he was, still a very young man. He went to the Yankees, and the geniuses with the Yankees, and I'm being serious, the owners, was it Jacob Rupert, I think, was the owner back then. I think he was the primary owner. We got to get this guy off the fucking mound, so to speak. And we need to make this guy an everyday player because he's doing things with the baseball bat, wink, wink, but he's doing things with the baseball bat that nobody's ever done. He's the best hitter we've ever seen. Sorry, I had to start driving. So when I mentioned about there are certain kinds of almost apocryphal stories or that things are exaggerated for effect, sometimes it's true. Like, for example, with regards to Babe Ruth, in 1932 in the World Series against the Cubs at Wrigley, he supposedly called his shot. He did not. That is a fictitious story. That did not happen. That was embellished. I think he pointed at something and they said, oh yeah, he called his shot. Bullshit. But Babe Ruth going to the Yankees was every bit as critical, not only to the success of the Yankees franchise, but to the success of Major League Baseball. And to be more specific, 1919, that was Babe Ruth's final season in Boston. Now, Boston had started to shift him from the mound to playing a lot of games also in the field. It's kind of like what they've done with Shuhei Ohtani, first in Anaheim and then with LA, where you have to figure out from the utility standpoint. Now, there were no metrics back then, but from the utility standpoint, you have to figure out where does this player have the most potential value. Babe Ruth's greatest potential value, ideally doing both, but realistically, his greatest value was as an offensive, absolute monster player. But 1919 in particular, as Harry Frazee was stressing over no, Nanette, and Babe Ruth ending up with the Yankees. 1919, unfortunately, is a notorious year in the history of baseball. It's the year of what's known as the Black Sox scandal. And I obviously don't have any time in this episode to go into it, but the John Sayles film from 1988 called 8 Men Out is a brilliant exploration of the Black Sox scandal. But in brief, there were a number of gamblers. There were players who were disgruntled because the owner of the Chicago White Sox, Charlie Comiskey, was a fucking piece of shit and didn't pay them right, didn't pay bonuses. He had agreed to, took advantage of every loophole to not pay what he was supposed to. He was one of the richest men in the world and just an awful, disgusting excuse for a human being. So the Chicago White Sox took money. Shoeless Joe, Field of Dreams, Say It Ain't So Joe, all of that, that's from that year. And there's a version of The Matrix in which Babe Ruth does not get traded to the Yankees, that Harry Frazee decides, I'm not going to do no, Nanette, and baseball goes under. That is how turned off fans were, how grossed out a lot of the country was that something like this could happen. And then people didn't end up going to prison. It was all horrendous. But Babe Ruth going to the Yankees, going to, even at the time, a big market, certainly bigger than Boston was back then. And Babe Ruth hitting 59 home runs his first year with the Yankees. And the thing is, the Yankee franchise had started to play better. They had more solid all-star caliber players. So it's not like they were a terrible team and here comes Babe and then later Lou Gehrig and now they're world beaters. They finished in third place in 1919. They were a good team. Babe made them, got them to the next level. So here's a guy hitting 59 home runs right in the middle of the dead ball era. He out-homered all but like 5 teams just that year. Again, think of what I'm saying. He hit more home runs than all but 5 teams in the American League put together. That is why it is impossible to compare Babe Ruth to anyone else. Because the numbers and what he was doing, yeah, the numbers would still look good today, but nobody is out-homering an entire team. It's just not, it's not reality. So the Yankees played at the Polo Grounds. And in 1921, they made the World Series for the first time and lost to the Giants. It was, we talk about home and Yanks and Mets and all this stuff, but the Yankees lost to the Giants in 21. And then in 1922, they played a 9-game World Series, best out of 9 that is, against the Giants, and they lost that one also. And 23, on this day, 102 years ago, the home opener at their ballpark. And I know it sounds ridiculous, but for 1923, that ballpark was incredibly advanced, way ahead of its time. The amenities as far as the bathrooms, as far as the quality of the food, and even the fact that the seats, by today's standards, they would not be comfortable, but the seats were better than any seats in any other ballpark that existed at that time. And bear in mind, both Wrigley Field and Fenway Park already existed. And Fenway Park looked pretty much the same today as it did back then. The great piece of trivia with Fenway Park was it opened the day after what? The day after the Titanic sank. I need you to swim, Rose. Swim. But 1923, the home opener, on this day 102 years ago, against the Boston Red Sox, and a really good pitcher named Howard Emke. I always loved that name. I remember being a 7-year-old boy reading about Howard Emke, because Howard Emke, for a time, he also, I know you've never heard of his name, he won 166 games over his career. He was a really good pitcher. Not a Hall of Famer, but a really good pitcher. But Howard Emke briefly held a record. Most strikeouts by a pitcher in a World Series game. He had 13, and for many years, that was the record. I didn't know that Howard Emke was actually the Boston Red Sox starter in the first game ever at what would become the House That Ruth Built on April 18th, 1923. Howard Emke started, and Babe Ruth hit a 3-run homer, and his home run was the difference in the game. And this is another kind of historical reality that you say, this is too perfect. If it were a movie, you would say, well, this is bullshit. You're telling me that that guy hit a home run against the team that traded him 4 years earlier? Yeah. Yes, that's exactly what I'm saying. And so the Yankees won the World Series in 1923. And if you want to look at it from the sort of broader perspective, this is crazy but true also. The Yankees played at that facility as it was. Very few, I mean, yeah, they'd make little adjustments here or there, but very few modifications from 1923 through 1973. And I feel like the 50th anniversary or 50 years, part of that was why they wanted to do a remodel. They figured that they'd had enough of the old park as it was. But just to give you the briefest of brief recaps, after winning the World Series in 1923, the Yankees went back against Philly in 26 and got beat. Grover Cleveland Alexander One of the all-time greats, another one like a Christy Mathewson, not as good as Christy Mathewson. And that's a World Series. Here's a trivia question if you're ever at a bar. How many World Series ended on a caught stealing? 1926. Babe Ruth got caught stealing with the potential tying run. Oh, he's a bum. Yeah, that's how the last out of the World Series was caught stealing. And Babe Ruth didn't say anything. He just picked himself up, dusted himself off, and went, probably had a cigar, had some hot dogs, maybe some brewskis. Who knows? But they won the 27 World Series. That was the team, top 5 greatest teams in the history of baseball, the 27 Yankees. There are those that would say that is the greatest team. Where they have about 8 Hall of Famers on the roster. It was absolute, total ridicularity. But they won it again in 28. They won it in 32, the called shot, which wasn't the called shot. And then they won it in 36, 37, 38, 39. Now, 36 was Joe DiMaggio's rookie year. And one thing with the Yankees is it always seemed that they had at least one generational talent, one of the 10 greatest players who ever lived on the roster, always. You had Babe Ruth and Lou Gehrig, with the Iron Horse, the 2,130 game Iron Man streak where he never took a day off. He played all those games in a row. And then, of course, amyotrophic lateral sclerosis ended his career. Lou Gehrig's disease, right? It's not named after just a random guy. It was named after maybe the greatest first baseman who ever played in baseball, Lou Gehrig, the Iron Horse. But by 36, Babe was gone. He was retired. He had left the Yanks. He went to the National League. He really couldn't really play anymore after 34. Joe DiMaggio's rookie year, 1936. The Yankee Clipper, Joe DiMaggio. The Yankees won the World Series 36, 37, 38, 39. They won another World Series in 41. They won another World Series in 43. They won, coming back from the war, in 1947. Joe DiMaggio, a primary mover in that World Series. The 56-game hitting streak in 1941, right? And then they won 5 straight World Series. That's something that's never happening again because all the layers of playoffs. You kidding me? Playoffs? Yeah, there weren't any playoffs. The 8 teams in the American League or whatever it was, 8 teams in the National League. Whoever finished first, who was in the World Series. So you didn't have any layers of playoffs when you get bumped off. Even the 27 Yanks, 5-game series, they could have lost. It's baseball, Susan. So then the Yankees, ironically, had their biggest win total in the Casey Stengel era in 1954 and didn't make the World Series because the Cleveland Indians beat them out of sight before losing to who? The New York Giants. And then they lost the 55 World Series to the Dodgers by infamous screenplay, which should have been made any number of times and is never, alas, going to get produced. But then the Yanks won it in 56. They won it in 58. They lost in 57. They lost in 60, a horrendous World Series defeat to the Pittsburgh Pirates. Really weren't very good. And they won in 61. That's another one of those magical years for the Yanks. Like, out of context, if I'm asked the question, 3 greatest seasons in Yankee history, the 3 best Yankees teams in history, 27, 61, 98. No problem. That's very, very simple. They won another World Series in 62, beating the now San Francisco Giants. Then they got their clock cleaned by the now Los Angeles Dodgers in 63. And they lost a tough series to Bob Gibson and the St. Louis Cardinals in 64. And then the dark times, the fall of the empire. The Yankees did not go back to the World Series until 1976. Now, when I mentioned the 50 years from 23 to 73, in 1974 and 1975, old Yankee Stadium, the House That Ruth Built, was remodeled. It was extensively remodeled. It was remodeled so much and to such an extent that if you didn't know that there was an existing structure, an existing ballpark, it looked like an entirely new stadium. It reopened in 1976. And in 74 and 5, the Yankees played at Shea Stadium, where the Mets played at the time, as I mentioned. The Yankees from 64 to 76, they had mostly lousy teams from 65 through 69. But they had some decent teams, and I'm sorry for the youngins. I always bring this up. But if the playoff structure of today existed back then, the Yankees would not have gone 12 years between postseason berths. They won 93 games in 1970. and they were obliterated by the 111 win Baltimore Orioles. You imagine winning 93 and you're 18 games out? Like, I mean, give you a fucking break, right? But 1976, when the remodeled, or Yankee Stadium 2, as Wikipedia calls it, reopened. The irony is, everybody called it the new stadium. Into the mid-80s, it was not called anything other than the new stadium. It wasn't new. It was a new remodel, a fresh coat of paint times 1,000. And what a gorgeous ballpark it was. And here's a little bit of personal trivia. My dad, my dear old dad, was very young at the time, but he was already partner level, CPA. He tried to get tickets for, I think it was April 15th or 16th or 17th, the home opener, not the season opener. He wasn't able to get tickets for the opener. It was a lot of fanfare and all kinds of shit going on that day with the military and planes flying overhead. But we went to the second game. And you look at pictures of that park now nearly 50 years ago, because there's a lot of great pictures of the ballpark as it looked. You can't believe how modern that place was. They really did more than put a fresh coat of paint on. The ballpark was fucking great. And I am still sad as a fan that they chose to tear it down. I just think it's terrible. They should have made it a museum or something. Anything but tearing that place down. My gosh. But the Yankees made it back to the postseason and the World Series in '76. Chris Chambliss, the Yanks beat the Kansas City Royals in a thrilling, one of the best 5-game series in the history of the Major League, certainly top 10, maybe even top 5. The Yanks got to the World Series, got swept by the Reds and the Big Red Machine. But then they won back-to-back World Series in '77 and '78, getting to celebrate the '77 series against the Dodgers at home, winning it in 6. That's the Reggie Jackson 3-home run game. That was the clincher. It wasn't just a random World Series game that he hit 3 homers. He hit 3 homers in a World Series clinching victory at Yankee Stadium. And according to my father, who is not here to tell this story, he plucked me out of bed after Reggie's 3rd homer and plopped me in front of the TV in their bedroom, which was a real shitty, black and white TV. I have vague memories of that. They wanted me to watch The Last Out, Dad and Mom. It's crazy to think they were so young at the time. My mother was 32 and my father was, 35? Just crazy. But the Yanks didn't win another World Series till 1996. They had a big season in 1980. Reggie Jackson had a monster year. Only time Reggie Jackson ever hit 300 in a season, 1980, is statistically probably his best year as far as WAR, 41 homers, 111 RBIs, hitting 300, just crazy. And he hit his 400th career homer that season. But they washed out of the playoffs. They got beat by the Royals. And in 1981, they lost a terrible World Series, a fucking horrible World Series to the Dodgers, where they took the first 2 games at home, went to LA for 3, had leads in all 3 games, big lead in game 4, lost them all, came home for game 6 and got the shit beat out of them in game 6, had a lead there too and lost. And here's another trivia question. What's the most unbreakable record in the history of the major leagues? Is it Johnny Vandermeer? What did he throw? He almost threw back-to-back no-hitters? I think it was back-to-back no-hitters. Nobody's beaten that, right? He almost threw back-to-back no-hitters. George Frazier lost 3 games in the 1981 World Series. I will go down on the hill and say that no pitcher will ever lose all 4 World Series games. George Frazier, no relation to Joe or Walt. Not a terrible pitcher. He gave a couple of bleeders and bloops and broken bat hits. They didn't even hit him that hard. He lost 3 games in a World Series. The Yanks didn't make the postseason for 14 years until 1995, where they had a miraculous rally in the first year of the wild card. If there hadn't been a strike, and if they had not changed the playoff structure, that Yankee team was also beaten out of sight. They were gone. That season would have been over in July. But because of the addition of the wild card, they had a big rally at the end of the season. They went 25-6 in their last 31 games to sneak into the postseason as a wild card. And they lost an incredibly thrilling series to the Seattle Mariners, who ended up getting taken out by Cleveland in the championship series. But the next year, the Yankees back to prominence, and they won 4 World Series in 5 years in what was still being called by some people the new stadium, but now there were rumblings and there were rumors that George Steinbrenner was going to move the team out of the Bronx. And George was really good. He was a very clever businessman at using leverage, and he was talking about maybe getting a stadium built near the West Side rail yards. I would have thought that would have been, I would have rather them do that than tear down the old stadium, quite frankly. I'm still pissed off. I'm sorry. No, I'm not even sorry. I'm mad that they tore that place down. But then sometime in like the mid-2000s, it was understood, no, we're going to build a park across the street. And the early word was that they were going to do like a sky dome kind of a place, that there was going to be a retractable roof. They ended up, that would have been too prohibitively expensive. Now you're going to have some rainouts, right? What are you going to do? But winning the 4 World Series in 5 years and getting to celebrate at home in 1996, 1999. Yeah, it was just 96 and 99. In 98, they ended up winning in San Diego. And in 2000, they celebrated Game 5 at Old Shea Stadium, the Yankee Mets World Series. And their next World Series win was 2009, the first year of the actual new ballpark. So you think about it. The first year of the House That Ruth Built, 1923, they win the World Series. The first year of the extensively remodeled Old Yankee Stadium, 1976, they go to the World Series. First year of the new stadium, 2009, they win a World Series. And we haven't won one since. 2009 was a great fan season. They had a lot of issues early in the year. They weren't playing that well. The Red Sox had kind of beaten the crap out of them. I think it was a year where the Red Sox took the first 8 games or some crazy stat like that against the Yanks, and then the Yanks won the last 9. It was really just a wacky year, but a magical year nevertheless. And I was fortunate enough, some of you know this, I had never been to a World Series game. I've been to a lot of playoff games, but I had never been to a World Series game. And the story, which I told in a previous episode on the anniversary of Game 6 of the 1996 World Series, is that my father, we would have had tickets 6 rows back, 30 feet up the first baseline on the first base side, if there had been a World Series Game 7 1996. Before the postseason, Dad and all of the guys on that same season ticket plan that SCF and Co. had a piece of, they didn't own it. They kind of spec'd out, and they had like 15 to 20 games out of the 81. But each of the partners of SCF got to choose one game in the 1996 playoffs. Most of the guys, 2 of them took in the first round, the Texas series, which ended up being a very exciting series. The Yankees were lucky to win that one the way that they did. But my dad, not a gambler, he was very cautious and very careful. Nobody took Game 7 of the 96 World Series because we didn't think we were going to get to a Game 7. We're not even going to make the World Series. And if we end up playing Atlanta, we're not getting to a Game 7. Well, Dad rolled the dice. And if the Atlanta Braves had won Game 6, we would have been at Game 7. I didn't want to see a Game 7. I would have loved to have gone to Game 6, but just win the World Series was my thought process. No, you fuck around and find out. No, don't lose Game 6 just so we can go to Game 7. But I went to playoff games. I was actually at Game 3 in 76. I was 2 years old. Dad got tickets. I was pretty good score for a 34-year-old accountant. He was a real baller, my old man. Even at that age, he was really good. Had some good clients when he was that age. We went to Game 3, which was a win. That's 2 nights or 2 days before the Chambliss homer, and 1 day before The Bronx is Burning. The Bronx is Burning. One of the great moments of TV history. Ladies and gentlemen, The Bronx is Burning. I don't know if that was Cosell or Keith Jackson. But I didn't go to any games during the great run in the 90s. I wish that I could have gone to Game 2 in 95. That's the one playoff game I wish I could have gone to, Game 2 in 95. But I went to Game 3 in 2000 against the A's. That was a win. I went to Game 1 in 2001, also against the A's. That was a loss. That was the series with the Jeter shovel pass in I think it was Game 3. And then went to Game 1 in 2002. We lost. Game 1 in 2003 against the Twins. We lost. Game 1 in 2004. We lost. But I got to go to back-to-back World Series games last year. Game 3, a loss. Game 4, a win. And as always, even though I don't watch that many games these days, I'm still a diehard's diehard, as you could tell by the fact I was able to recall some of this nonsense, and you could check my work. Probably made a couple of mistakes. Maybe I got some of Babe Ruth's years mixed up. But as far as the more recent vintage, yeah, I like to think that I know my history, and I know my New York Yankees history in particular. 102 years. It's kind of crazy. You know, my grandfather, may he rest in peace, my dad's dad was a big Yankees fan. He was born August 12, 1913. I don't know if he ever went to a game and saw Babe Ruth play. I don't know that. I don't think that he did. He didn't really have the kind of money because he grew up in the Bronx. I should have mentioned that at the top there. But 102 years of Yankee Stadium. And you know, the team has not looked great for stretches, but they recently had a 4-game winning streak. It's tough without Cole and Luis Heel being out, but they got a lot of skilled players. Bellinger's looking good in the field, and he's had his moments at the plate. Judge is Judge, and Stanton's coming back. Ben Rice looks potentially like an all-star. The Yanks are probably going to go over 90 wins. I don't know that they'll necessarily win the division this year, but as usual, they will be a title contender. And that is something that, other than that stretch in the 60s and the kind of dog days circa 1990, that a couple of lousy years, they are almost always title contenders. Going back to the days of Babe Ruth and Lou Gehrig, and later Joe DiMaggio and Mickey Mantle. And the next player of that ilk, if you don't want to count Mariano Rivera, but the next player at that top tier, at that exalted level, at that generational level, is Aaron Judge. 102 years of Yankee Stadium. The new one is across the street. I miss the old one. This has been episode 400 and I think 89, maybe 88, of the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all so much for spending some of your first Friday afternoon and now early Friday evening here with me in New York. But if you check out this episode on the YouTube channel, haven't done so already, please click like, subscribe, comment, share, turn on those notifications. Or if you catch this episode on the audio platforms such as Podbean, Spotify, iTunes, or the others in which we're hosted, same general rule applies. Click like, subscribe, share, and turn on those notifications. I'll be back with a new episode real soon. Till then, peace.